Okay, so let's spend a few moments discussing some problems with evidence-based policing, or at least maybe not problems, but challenges that may emerge because of this. Uh, so the first thing, right, is that because we rely on experimental and quasi-experimental evidence, right? This is of course supposed to be the highest quality, assuming it's implemented well, has good treatment fidelity, and so on, right? What this ends up doing is creating a problem in the sense that it's unlikely that you'll have this level of control in any kind of study in or any kind of police department, right? Typically when we want to do any kind of research study, we want to have high external validity so that these results are generalizable to other agencies, other scenarios, other parts in the public, and so on, right? And so when we rely on experimental and quasi-experimental evidence, right, the quality is going to be good, but there remain a lot of questions about, how useful it's going to be and, what exactly can we do with it, right? Another segment that we have, and because we focus on this, right, and as we kind of mentioned, there is this focus on impacts, right? We also tend to lose out on the process, right? So there are very few like process evaluations that go on that are disseminated. Now they do exist. I don't want to say that they don't do that, right? But what exactly do I mean? So there are usually not a lot of process evaluations in terms of how plans are communicated with command staff or administration, how that training and mission was communicated to line officers. Like how is this information communicated with, like what kind of treatments for fidelity, what problems emerged, how were those problems resolved, like what were some unintended consequences, how did this affect the community. So when you only focus on the core outcome, you lose a lot of information in the process of what actually happened, right? This issue is particularly important because a lot of the challenges that come with doing effective policing is getting an effective process in place to actually implement it, right? And because we tend to focus, we want to have high external validity, right? We also know that one of the problems is that agencies are highly local, right? They don't necessarily care about if you think about San Bernardino PD, right? They probably don't give a shit what's going on in Fontana, right? They might if it's of interest to them or something like that, and they have a good partnership, but they aren't necessarily interested in what's happening. And what might work in Fontana may not be a good policy or effective in San Bernardino, right? So plus there's unique problems between each community. The command staff is different, the structure, the priorities are different depending on the police department. And as a result of that, right, when you look at impact studies, they may focus on a particular type of crime or implement it in a certain way, but a certain agency may not have the resources to do that. They also may not have the ability to implement it properly. They may not have the ability. They may have different priorities, and the crime solution that is offered just can't be done in a certain community, right? So that information kind of becomes useless, really. Or it's it's so specific that it just can't be used. Another thing to consider as well is that when we think about research evidence, one of the greatest challenges of any kind of academic or any kind of research design group, right, is to make this information accessible, right? Accessible for people who may not, who have great experience in understanding how police work, how to mobilize units, how to train officers and stuff like that. But aren't necessarily going to know, about what research means, what a fidelity means, how to improve it, implement it, and stuff like that. I mean, those are very different things that may or may not work out, right? So it could be a problem because of that. If this information is not accessible and can be broken down, easily understood, mapped into some objectives from a police department standpoint, that information is otherwise useless, right? So that is an important, crucial thing to remember because of this. Related to this point is the fact too is that there is maybe like a distrust of academics or research practitioners in general, mainly because many of them have never been police officers or worked as a police officer before, right? That certainly is true for me. I was never a police officer. I tried. I was not accepted. I'm sure I wasn't accepted for a lot of reasons, but I just couldn't get in. Never made it, right? So I don't know. I don't have that experience of being a police officer and practicing learning their language or communicating or understanding like how police think, right? I study police, and I guess there's some argument to be made about should I even study police if I've never been a police officer, right? There are some, of course, academics who have been police officers who later on became professors. Someone like Peter Moskos or David Klinger come to mind. Someone I went to grad school with, Valerie Romack. She is an example of people who were actually real police who became professors, right? But so that maybe they're more likely to trust them, but agencies are often worried about a study making them look bad and the political ramifications of that, right? So it's a complex interplay about what is going to work, what is not, and so on, right? So especially because academics, well, they can be known for being a little bit greedy in terms of they want certain things, and they're because of that, they're willing to collect evidence and leave officers hanging, right? And that breeds a distrust. The other part too is that there are political and economic factors at play, and this goes back to being a highly local thing, right? Just because something seems effective or is believed to be effective, right? Let's say, for example, that for whatever reason, right? Let's say like the biggest crime solution was police officers being friendly and treating people with dignity and respect, and like not using force. Let's just say that, for example, for some arbitrary crime problem. The problem is that there are going to be some like politicians. There are going to be some police departments who don't really like that, right? Because it doesn't communicate a strong, effective police presence, right? Because if we want to be tough on crime, if we want to show that we're not taking flack from anyone, having friendly police officers who aren't busting heads and making the mayor look good for having a tough police department or something like that, is really not effective, right? So just because, as a result of that, something that works may not be politically convenient, and as a result may not be implemented. Part of that too is that if some problems, right, because everything's local depending on the local conditions, right? Just may not have the money or the resources to hire police departments to do hotspots policing or to have a special unit to focus on disorder policing. They just simply don't have the cash, right? So to the extent that you make a recommendation or an argument, right, that you should do this, right, it doesn't matter if I don't have the money to do it, right? So that task kind of becomes useless. So there's sort of a bias as a result towards agencies with money and who can implement it, but not so much on, like, say, a low-cost solution, right? So that is, something that may inhibit acceptance or adopting, evidence-based policing practices, just simply because, if you don't have you need a low cost, right? Especially since, you're going to be evaluated as a police department by your ability to curb crime. And if you don't have extra money to, do some new fancy fangled thing, or you don't have the resources to, get money or something like that, then it's not going to be effective for you, right? And that creates a problem, because if you aren't able to, get the money or the resources to do the new fancy new thing, then it's pretty much worthless then, right? At that point, right? And it's not something that, you should be, focused on. So, all of these are examples of things that limit and inhibit, evidence-based policing practices, but it doesn't shy away from the fact that, it's still a critically important thing to do. So when we talk about, future directions stuff, right, all these problems are things that should be, shown to be accessible or shown to be, a good problem-solving technique that should be overcome by future generations of researchers or academics. And that's something that is continued to be worked on now, but still have a long road ahead. I think for this particular week, this is kind of a very simple kind of topic. It's not hard, so we'll just go ahead and end it here. But hopefully, this is useful for just kind of contextualizing some of the conversation on evidence-based policing.